What if the problem is not that you think too small? What if the real problem is that you keep designing a life where thinking bigger becomes almost useless? Because that is where many people get trapped. They hear that mindset matters. They hear that belief shapes results. They hear that confidence, vision, and discipline can change everything. And for a few minutes, it feels true. That they feel awake. They feel charged. They feel like something inside them has finally clicked. But then the video ends. The day continues. The phone lights up. The same people call. The same bills exist. The same habits return. The same fears whisper from the background. And slowly, almost without noticing, the person goes back to the exact life that created the old way of thinking in the first place. That is the part nobody wants to face. You cannot build a new mind while living in a system that rewards your old self every single day. You can say different words. You can repeat powerful statements. You can write goals in a notebook. You can imagine success so clearly that it almost feels real. But if your daily life keeps training you to avoid discomfort, seek approval, postpone responsibility, escape into distraction, and negotiate with your own weakness, then the old mind is still being fed. And whatever you feed long enough becomes normal. That is why mindset is not just something you believe. Mindset is something your life teaches you to believe. Every morning, every choice, every conversation, every compromise, every small surrender that you call harmless. You are not only thinking your life into shape, you are also living your thoughts into permanence. That means your environment is not neutral. Your habits are not neutral. Your friendships are not neutral. Your entertainment is not neutral. Your private excuses are not neutral. They are all training you. The only question is whether they are training you to become stronger or training you to remain available for the same patterns. And that is where this gets uncomfortable. Because most people do not lack desire. They lack a structure that can protect desire from decay. Anyone can want a better future. Anyone can say they are tired of mediocrity. Anyone can declare that they are meant for more. But the moment that desire enters ordinary life, it starts getting attacked. Not always dramatically, not by some great enemy, but by small things. A late night, a lazy morning, a familiar insecurity, a message from someone who knows how to pull you back, a bad mood, a little temptation, a little resentment, a little voice that says, "Not today." And if your future depends on winning one heroic battle, maybe you have a chance. But if your future depends on winning hundreds of small, invisible battles, then you need more than inspiration. You need architecture. You need rules. You need standards. You need a way of living that makes your old self less convenient. Because your old self survives by convenience. It survives because staying the same is easier to explain. It survives because chaos can feel familiar. It survives because distraction is cheap. It survives because complaining gives emotional relief without demanding action. It survives because dreaming lets you taste success without paying the price of becoming capable of it. And this is one of the most dangerous things about human beings. We can become emotionally attached to the exact patterns that are limiting us. Not because those patterns are good, but because they are known. A person can hate their life and still protect the habits that created it. A person can complain about being stuck and still defend the identity that keeps them stuck. A person can ask for change and still resist the smallest daily evidence that change requires. That is why transformation often feels like betrayal. Not betrayal of who you really are. Betrayal of who you were trained to be. If you grew up being doubted, confidence may feel arrogant. If you grew up being ignored, asking for more may feel dangerous. If you grew up around scarcity, ambition may feel unrealistic. If you were punished for being honest, boundaries may feel cruel. If your love was tied to performance, rest may feel like guilt. And if failure was used against you, trying seriously may feel like walking into humiliation. So when people say, "Just believe in yourself," they often miss the deeper problem. Some people are not fighting lack of belief. They are fighting loyalty to an old survival system. A system that once protected them. A system that told them not to risk too much, not to speak too clearly, not to expect too much, not to want too loudly, not to leave too soon, not to become visible, not to become powerful, not to become someone others might criticize. And the hardest thing is that this system does not always feel like fear. Sometimes it feels like personality. I'm just realistic. I am just careful. I'm just not that kind of person. I am just waiting for the right time. I'm just avoiding drama. I am just tired. Maybe. Or maybe those are elegant names for obedience. Obedience to a version of you that was built for safety, not growth. And that version may have helped you survive. But survival is not the same as living well. At some point, you have to ask whether the strategies that helped you endure the past are now stealing the future. That question matters, because you cannot change your life while worshiping every defense mechanism you developed along the way. You can understand them. You can respect where they came from. You can even feel compassion for the person who needed them. But you cannot let them rule forever. There is a point where the shield becomes the cage, and many people never notice when that happens. They call the cage wisdom. They call it maturity. They call it being practical, but deep inside they know. They know there is something they keep avoiding. They know there is a conversation they keep delaying. They know there is a habit that is costing them more than they admit. They know there is a relationship, environment, or identity that keeps making them smaller. They know there is a version of themselves that only appears in dreams, plans, and private promises, but not in the calendar, not in the bank account, not in the body, not in the daily choices, not in the way they spend their attention. And attention is where this whole thing begins, because your attention is the gatekeeper of your future. Whatever holds your attention long enough starts shaping your emotional reality. And whatever shapes your emotional reality starts influencing your decisions. This is why distraction is not harmless. It is not just wasted time. It is wasted formation. Every day, something is forming you. If you spend your attention on comparison, you train insecurity. If you spend it on outrage, you train reactivity. If you spend it on fantasy, you train avoidance. If you spend it on people who constantly drain you, you train emotional dependency. If you spend it on learning, building, thinking, and practicing, you train capability. The modern world does not need to destroy your ambition directly. It only needs to fragment your attention until your ambition becomes too weak to organize your life. That is the silent attack. Not one dramatic failure, not one impossible obstacle, just 1,000 interruptions, 1,000 impulses, 1,000 tiny escapes, until your future becomes something you keep postponing while your nervous system stays busy. Busy is not the same as directed. That sentence is important. Busy is not the same as directed. A person can be busy for 10 years and still be circling the same emotional room. Busy answering messages, busy reacting to other people's emergencies, busy consuming advice, busy talking about plans, busy recovering from self-created chaos, busy preparing to start, busy explaining why they have not started. And because they are exhausted, they believe they are progressing. But exhaustion is not proof of progress. Sometimes exhaustion is proof of poor direction. This is why the first act of a stronger mind is not motivation. It is separation. You have to separate movement from progress, emotion from truth, familiarity from destiny, fear from wisdom, comfort from peace, attention from noise, and desire from commitment. Because desire and commitment are not the same thing. Desire asks, wouldn't it be nice? Commitment asks, what am I willing to stop being? That is why commitment is harder. Desire lets you keep your image of yourself. Commitment starts taking things away. It takes away the excuse. It takes away the illusion of infinite time. It takes away the comfort of being misunderstood. It takes away the pleasure of blaming everything outside of you. It takes away the identity of someone who almost changed. And that identity is addictive. Being someone who is about to change can feel surprisingly good. You get the emotional reward of possibility without the exposure of execution. You can talk about the business. Talk about the body, talk about the healing, talk about the project, talk about the new life, talk about the person you are becoming. But as long as everything remains about to happen, reality cannot test it. That is why beginnings are seductive. Beginnings are full of energy. New notebooks, new plans, new routines, new promises, new declarations. The beginning allows you to imagine yourself as disciplined before discipline has been tested. But the middle is different. The middle is where people disappear. The middle has no applause. The middle is repetitive. The middle is boring. The middle exposes whether you wanted the identity or only the feeling of starting. And most meaningful change is built in the middle. Not in the announcement, not in the emotional decision, not in the public declaration. In the middle. The days where nothing dramatic happens. The days where you do the work and nobody knows. The days where the result is not visible yet. The days where you are tired of your own promise, but you keep it anyway. That is where the mind is rebuilt. Because confidence is not created by telling yourself you are powerful. Confidence is created when your own memory has evidence that you do not abandon yourself every time life becomes inconvenient. Your mind keeps records. It remembers the promises you broke. It remembers the goals you abandoned. It remembers the boundaries you betrayed. It remembers the times you said, "This is the last time," and then returned. But it also remembers the opposite. It remembers when you kept going. It remembers when you did the difficult thing. It remembers when you chose dignity over impulse. It remembers when you acted without applause. It remembers when you stopped negotiating with a pattern that was destroying you. That is how self-trust grows. Self-trust is not a mood. It is a memory of kept promises. And if you do not trust yourself right now, maybe the answer is not to insult yourself. Maybe the answer is to start giving your mind new memories, small ones, real ones. Memories that say, "I do what I said I would do. I can survive discomfort. I can tell the truth. I can leave what weakens me. I can begin again without making a performance out of it. I can become someone I believe." That last line matters, because many people are trying to believe in a version of themselves they have not started to support with evidence. They want the emotion of confidence before the behavior of confidence. But life usually works the other way. You act, then you believe more. You repeat, then you identify with it. You endure, then you respect yourself. You build evidence, then certainty becomes less artificial. That is why the question is not, "How do I believe in myself?" instantly. The better question is, what evidence would make self-belief reasonable? Because belief is stronger when it has roots, and roots grow in action. Not in fantasy, not in endless planning, not in consuming more motivational content. Action, but not random action. Directed action, because some people act constantly and still avoid the one thing that matters. They clean the room instead of making the call. They redesign the logo instead of selling the product. They read another book instead of applying the last one. They analyze their emotions instead of making the decision they already understand. They prepare endlessly because preparation feels safer than exposure. This is sophisticated avoidance, and it is one of the biggest traps for intelligent people. They do not procrastinate by doing nothing. They procrastinate by doing adjacent things. Things close enough to the goal to feel responsible, but far enough from the real risk to remain comfortable. And that can last years. Years of research, years of planning, years of almost, years of refining, years of waiting to be ready. But readiness is often a story we tell ourselves to avoid the first ugly version. The first attempt is usually clumsy. The first offer may be ignored. The first video may be rough. The first conversation may shake your voice. The first investment may scare you. The first boundary may make you feel guilty. The first month of discipline may feel unnatural. Good. That means you are touching the edge of your current identity. Do not confuse awkwardness with failure. Awkwardness is often the sound of a new self being assembled. The old self moves smoothly because it has years of practice. The new self feels strange because it is being born. So if change feels uncomfortable, that does not automatically mean it is wrong. It may mean the old pattern is losing authority, and the old pattern will fight back. It will use nostalgia. It will use fatigue. It will use guilt. It will use people who preferred you predictable. It will use your own memories against you. It will say, "Who do you think you are?" That question can destroy some people, but it can also awaken something. Because maybe the answer is, I am someone who no longer wants to be managed by fear. Not someone perfect, not someone above others, not someone who has everything figured out. Someone who has decided that fear may speak, but it no longer gets the final vote. That is a serious decision, and it will not always feel empowering. Sometimes it will feel lonely. Because when you stop acting like the old version of yourself, some people will feel inconvenienced. Not because you are hurting them, but because your old role benefited them. Maybe you were the one who always listened, always adapted, always waited, always apologized first, always lowered your standards to keep the peace, always made your needs smaller so the relationship could continue. And when you stop, they may call you cold. They may say you changed. They may say you think you are better now. But not every accusation deserves a defense. Sometimes you changed is not an insult. It is confirmation. Yes, you changed. That was the point. The goal was never to remain easy to access for every person who knew how to use your wounds. The goal was to become harder to manipulate, harder to distract, harder to guilt, harder to pull back into chaos, harder to convince that your dreams are too much. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, let it. Because a life built around not disappointing anyone often becomes a life where you disappoint yourself every day. That is too expensive. There is a price for becoming stronger, but there is also a price for staying the same. People only talk about the cost of change. They rarely talk about the cost of not changing. The years lost, the confidence eroded, the opportunities missed, the relationships tolerated, the health ignored, the money wasted, the creativity buried, the resentment accumulated. The quiet grief of knowing you kept betraying your own potential. That cost is real. It just arrives slowly. That is why people underestimate it. Change demands payment up front. Staying the same sends the bill later. And later is usually more expensive. So when you say you are not ready to change, be honest about what you are choosing. You are not choosing nothing. You are choosing the current trajectory. You are choosing the pattern to continue. You are choosing the same inputs to produce the same outputs. You are choosing familiarity over possibility. Maybe that is understandable, but do not call it neutral. There is no neutral life. Every day votes for something. Your calendar votes. Your spending votes. Your private habits vote. Your relationships vote. Your attention votes. Your repeated excuses vote. And your future counts the votes. That is why you cannot wait until your life feels serious to become serious about your life. The seriousness has to come first. Not heaviness, not obsession, not panic, seriousness. The quiet realization that your days are not disposable, that your attention is not cheap, that your body is not separate from your ambition, that your money is not just numbers, that your relationships are not random emotional weather. That your habits are not small. They are the machinery of your future. Once you understand that, everything starts to look different. A morning is not just a morning. It is a vote. A conversation is not just a conversation. It is an influence. A purchase is not just a purchase. It is a signal. A boundary is not just a boundary. It is self-definition. A repeated excuse is not just an excuse. It is identity rehearsal. And a kept promise is not just a task completed. It is self-respect being built in real time. This is the part of mindset that is not glamorous enough for most people. It is not about walking around feeling unstoppable. It is about becoming less negotiable with what weakens you. Not rigid, not cruel, not arrogant. Less negotiable. There are things you should no longer negotiate with. Your sleep, your health, your dignity, your focus, your financial future, your word to yourself, your ability to think clearly. Your right to leave environments that keep shrinking you. When everything is negotiable, your life has no spine. And a life without a spine bends toward whatever pressure is closest. Pressure from family, pressure from fear, pressure from desire, pressure from social media, pressure from old habits, pressure from loneliness, pressure from people who benefit from your confusion. You need a spine, a set of inner rules that protect the person you are trying to become. Not because rules are romantic, but because without rules, your weakest moment becomes your leader, and your weakest moment should not be allowed to design your future. Think about that. How many decisions have people made from their weakest moment? They returned to someone because they felt lonely for one night. They spent money because they felt anxious for one afternoon. They abandoned a plan because they felt discouraged for 1 week. They insulted themselves because one attempt did not work. They gave up a long-term future because of a temporary emotional storm. This is why emotional weather cannot be your compass. The emotions are information, not instructions. They can tell you something needs attention. They can reveal hunger, fear, grief, desire, exhaustion, resentment, or longing. But they do not always tell you what to do. Sometimes your emotion says, run, but your growth says, stay and learn. Sometimes your emotion says, text them, but your dignity says, let silence tell the truth. Sometimes your emotion says, buy it, but your future says, keep the money. Sometimes your emotion says, quit, but your deeper self says, rest, then continue. The mature mind listens to emotion without surrendering authority to it. That is not suppression. That is leadership. You are not trying to become a machine. You are trying to stop being ruled by every passing state. Because if every mood can change your direction, then you do not have direction. You have impulses with a schedule, and that is exhausting. A stronger mind does not eliminate inner conflict. It learns to organize it. It says, this part of me is afraid. This part of me wants comfort. This part of me wants revenge. This part of me wants approval. This part of me wants to disappear. But none of those parts gets to run the whole life. That is inner leadership, and it is one of the most important skills a person can develop, because success is not only about external strategy, it is about internal governance. Can you govern your attention? Can you govern your reactions? Can you govern your mouth when ego wants control? Can you govern your spending when anxiety wants relief? Can you govern your desire when dignity is at stake? Can you govern your time when distraction is available? Can you govern your identity when old voices return? Most people want more power before they can manage the power they already have. But if you cannot manage a small day, a bigger life may only create bigger chaos. This is why growth has to be built from the ordinary. Not because ordinary is exciting, because ordinary is where you actually live. Your life is not mostly made of big decisions. It is made of repeated micro-decisions. What you do when you wake up, what you consume, how you respond, what you avoid, what you finish, what you tolerate, what you normalize, what you return to, what you practice when nobody is watching. That is the real workshop. You do not need a dramatic reinvention every week. You need a more honest relationship with repetition. Repetition is the architect, and the scary part is that repetition works whether you respect it or not. Repeat avoidance, and avoidance becomes character. Repeat courage, and courage becomes more accessible. Repeat chaos, and chaos feels normal. Repeat clarity, and clarity gets easier. Repeat excuses, and excuses become identity. Repeat execution, and execution becomes natural. This is why small actions are not small. They are identity votes. And yes, one vote may not decide the whole election, but repeated votes do. So stop asking whether today's action is enough to transform your entire life. That is the wrong question. Ask whether today's action votes for the person you claim you want to become. That question is better, because it brings the future into the present without overwhelming you. You do not have to solve 10 years tonight. You have to stop voting against yourself today. That is manageable. And it is also brutal, because it removes the drama. Some people prefer drama, because drama makes their life feel important. But discipline often feels quiet. There is no soundtrack, no audience, no cinematic moment, just you and the decision. Again and again and again. But those quiet decisions build something that noise never can. They build inner proof. And once you have inner proof, outside opinions lose some of their power. Not all of it. You are human. Words still affect you. Rejection still stings. Criticism still lands. But it does not define you as easily. Because you have evidence. You know what you have done. You know what you have survived. You know what you have changed. You know what you no longer allow. And when you know that, you do not need to perform confidence so aggressively. You carry it quietly. That kind of confidence is different. It does not need to humiliate others. It does not need to announce itself constantly. It does not need to pretend everything is easy. It simply says, I can trust myself to face what comes. That may be the most valuable form of confidence. Not I will always win, but I will not abandon myself when I do not. Because losses will happen, mistakes will happen, bad timing will happen, people will disappoint you. You will disappoint yourself. Plans will break. Motivation will disappear. And if your mindset only works when life is smooth, it is not a mindset. It is a mood. A real mindset must survive friction. It must know how to recover. It must know how to correct without collapsing. It must know how to admit, that did not work. I was wrong. I need to learn. I need to repair. I need to continue. This is where many people confuse confidence with denial. Denial says, nothing is wrong. Confidence says, something is wrong and I can face it. Denial says, I do not need to change. Confidence says, I am capable of changing. Denial protects ego. Confidence protects growth. Those are not the same. If you want a mind that can actually produce results, you need a mind that can tolerate truth. Not just positive truth, all truth. The truth about your potential. but also the truth about your patterns, the truth about your dreams, but also the truth about your avoidance, the truth about your pain, but also the truth about the ways you sometimes use that pain to stay unavailable for responsibility. This is not comfortable, but it is clean, and clean pain is better than dirty comfort. Dirty comfort is the comfort that keeps costing you, the comfort of not checking your finances, the comfort of not having the conversation, the comfort of staying distracted, the comfort of making jokes about your own ambition, the comfort of pretending you do not care, the comfort of not trying seriously, the comfort of remaining emotionally dependent on people who are inconsistent. It feels soft in the moment, but it leaves residue. You know when you are lying to yourself, maybe not loudly, but your body knows. There is a heaviness to self-betrayal, a quiet loss of respect, a private discomfort you cannot fully explain, and the longer you ignore it, the more normal it feels. That is dangerous, because a person can adapt to a life that is far below what they are capable of. Humans can normalize almost anything. We can normalize stress, normalize disrespect, normalize financial disorder, normalize emotional chaos, normalize procrastination, normalize low expectations, normalize never finishing, normalize being tired all the time, normalize abandoning ourselves. And once something becomes normal, we stop questioning it. That is why one of the first signs of growth is disgust, not hatred, not shame. Disgust in the clean sense. The moment you look at a pattern and say, I cannot keep living like this. That sentence has power, but only if you use it. Some people say it every month and then go back, so the sentence loses force. Your mind stops believing your own declarations. That is why you must be careful with dramatic promises. Do not say never again if you are not ready to build the structure that protects never again. Do not announce a new life if tomorrow is designed exactly like the old one. Do not confuse emotional intensity with commitment. Intensity fades, structure remains. If you want change, build structure while the emotion is still warm. Make the decision easier to repeat. Remove the trigger. Set the rule. Change the environment. Prepare the next action. Reduce friction. Increase consequence. Tell the truth to someone who will not flatter your excuses. Because without structure, even sincere desire becomes vulnerable. This is not weakness. It is human design. You are not meant to win every battle with raw willpower. Willpower gets tired. Systems carry you when emotion drops. That is why successful people often look more disciplined than they feel. They are not arguing with themselves about every decision. They already built defaults. A default for mornings. A default for money. A default for work. A default for health. A default for focus. A default for what they do when they feel low. A default for what they do when they fail. If you have no defaults, your mood becomes the manager. And your mood is not qualified. So ask yourself, what happens automatically in my life? Do I automatically reach for distraction? Automatically avoid hard conversations? Automatically spend when anxious? Automatically chase approval? Automatically delay important work? Automatically return to people who disturb my peace? Automatically speak to myself like someone I would never respect? Your defaults reveal your real training. And the work is to replace them, not all at once, but deliberately. One default at a time. For example, when you feel overwhelmed, your old default may be to escape into scrolling. A new default could be to write down the next physical action. Not the whole plan, just the next action. When you feel rejected, your old default may be to chase validation. A new default could be to pause, breathe, and refuse to beg for emotional certainty from someone who created uncertainty. When you feel afraid of failure, your old default may be to prepare forever. A new default could be to ship the imperfect first version. When you feel guilt for setting a boundary, your old default may be to over-explain. A new default could be to say less and stay firm. This is how a mind changes, not by one giant revelation. By new defaults installed under pressure, because pressure reveals the real program. Anyone can sound wise when calm, but what do you do when you are triggered? What do you do when you are tired? What do you do when someone challenges your identity? What do you do when progress is slow? What do you do when nobody is watching? That is the true exam. And the goal is not to pass perfectly. The goal is to recover faster. A stronger mind is not a mind that never falls. It is a mind that shortens the distance between falling and returning. Before, one bad day became a bad week, then a bad month, then a story about why you cannot change. Now, one bad day becomes a reset. You notice it. You name it. You return. No performance, no self-destruction, no dramatic collapse. Just return. That is mastery. The return. Because life will interrupt you. Your own mind will interrupt you. People will interrupt you. Circumstances will interrupt you. The question is whether every interruption becomes an identity crisis. It does not have to. You can say, I lost rhythm. I return. I made a mistake. I repair. I felt fear. I move anyway. I got distracted. I come back. I broke a promise. I make the next one smaller and keep it. That kind of return builds a powerful kind of self-respect, a realistic one, not the self-respect of perfection, the self-respect of resilience. And resilience is not just surviving pain. Sometimes resilience is refusing to romanticize pain. This matters because some people turn suffering into a personality. They do not just have a wound. They build a home inside it. They decorate it with explanations. They invite others to visit. They protect it from challenge. And if anyone suggests they can step out, they feel attacked. Because the wound has become identity. But you are allowed to be more than what hurt you. You are allowed to stop introducing yourself to life through your damage. You are allowed to say, yes, that shaped me, but it does not get to finish me. That is not denial. That is ownership. And ownership is the opposite of helplessness. Ownership does not mean everything was your fault. It means your next move is still yours. That distinction can save years of your life. Because if you confuse responsibility with blame, you will reject responsibility to protect yourself from shame. But responsibility is not shame. Responsibility is access. It is the part of the door you can touch. Maybe you cannot change what happened. Maybe you cannot change certain limitations immediately. Maybe you cannot control other people. Maybe you cannot erase the past. But you can often change the next pattern, the next choice, the next boundary, the next hour, the next interpretation, the next input, the next repetition. And if you change enough nexts, you eventually change the direction. Not instantly, but actually. This is where the world becomes less mystical and more demanding. A new mind needs a new relationship with time. Because people who waste their lives often do not feel like they are wasting their lives. They feel like they are waiting. Waiting for certainty, waiting for healing, waiting for the right moment, waiting for courage, waiting for support, waiting for a sign. But waiting can become a beautiful name for fear. Yes, there are seasons where patience is wise, but there are also seasons where patience is just avoidance wearing clean clothes. You have to know the difference. Patience is active, avoidance is passive. Patience prepares, avoidance postpones. Patience gathers strength, avoidance gathers excuses. Patience has a direction, avoidance has a loop. So ask yourself honestly, am I waiting because the time is not right? Or am I waiting because action would force me to become visible? That question cuts deep, because visibility is terrifying. If you try, people can judge. If you sell, people can reject. If you speak, people can disagree. If you set a boundary, people can leave. If you commit, people can see whether you follow through. If you become serious, you can no longer hide behind your own potential. Potential is safe when it remains untested. That is why some people protect potential more than progress. They would rather be someone who could have been great than someone who tried and had to face reality. But unused potential is not noble. It becomes grief, a private grief. The kind that appears when you see someone else doing what you kept delaying. The kind that appears when you realize the years did not wait for you. The kind that appears when you can no longer blame youth, confusion, or lack of time. Do not let potential become a museum of unlived versions of yourself. Use it, risk it, put it into the world imperfectly. Let it be corrected by reality. That is how it becomes skill. And skill matters, because mindset without skill becomes fantasy. This is another correction people need. Belief is not a substitute for competence. You cannot affirm your way into mastery while refusing practice. You cannot visualize your way into financial wisdom while ignoring numbers. You cannot declare yourself emotionally mature while avoiding difficult conversations. You cannot become valuable by only believing you are valuable. Belief may open the door. Skill keeps you in the room. Character determines what you do once you get there. So yes, believe. But then learn, practice, measure, adjust, repeat. Become useful, become precise, become someone whose confidence has substance behind it. The world eventually tests what you claim. And when it does, you want more than words. You want preparation. This does not make the message less inspiring. It makes it more respectful. Because telling people they only need belief can become insulting to the real difficulty of building a life. People need belief, but they also need tools. Habits, knowledge, emotional regulation, financial awareness, better environments, health, boundaries, patience, recovery, execution, and the humility to be a beginner. That humility is powerful. Many people do not grow because they are too proud to be bad at the beginning. They want the identity of excellence without the embarrassment of learning. But every strong person has had to pass through incompetence. The first version is not the final version. The first attempt is data. The first failure is instruction. The first awkward step is entry. Stop demanding that your beginning look like someone else's middle. That comparison is poison. You compare your private disorder to another person's public result. You compare your first chapter to their 10th. You compare your fear to their edited confidence, and then you call yourself behind. Behind compared to what? A timeline you did not design? A person whose full story you do not know? An image curated to make you feel late? Comparison can be useful if it teaches, but destructive if it humiliates. Use other people as proof of possibility, not as weapons against yourself. Someone ahead of you is not automatically an insult. They can be a map. A signal, evidence that certain paths exist, but your job is not to copy their life. Your job is to become responsible for yours, and responsibility becomes easier when you stop trying to impress imaginary observers. There is so much wasted energy in performing growth, posting the plan, announcing the change, explaining the journey, proving the transformation. Sometimes the most powerful move is to become quiet and build. Let the evidence speak later, not because you are hiding, because premature applause can weaken the hunger that should be going into the work. Some goals need privacy, not secrecy from fear, privacy from contamination. When a goal is young, it is fragile. If you expose it too early to sarcasm, doubt, cheap advice, or your own need for validation, it can lose strength. Protect the early stage. Build before you explain. Practice before you announce. Let the new self gain roots before you ask the world to recognize it. Because the world recognizes results more easily than intentions. And that is not always unfair. People hear promises every day. They see declarations every day. They watch people start and stop every day. So do not be angry if the world waits for proof. Give proof. Not for them first. For you. Because you are the one who needs to know you are no longer just talking. Now we arrive at the deepest part. Changing your mind is not about becoming more positive. It is about becoming more truthful. Truthful about what you want. Truthful about what it costs. Truthful about what you fear. Truthful about what you keep repeating. Truthful about who benefits from your confusion. Truthful about what you must practice. Truthful about what you must leave. Truthful about what you are no longer willing to call normal. Positivity can help you move. Truth keeps you from moving in circles. So here's the uncomfortable practice. Do not ask, what do I want? At least not first. Ask, what does my current life prove I have been choosing? That question strips away fantasy. Your current life may prove you have been choosing comfort over growth, approval over honesty, distraction over focus, intensity over peace, image over substance, explanation over execution, survival over construction. Once you see that, you can choose differently, but not abstractly. Specifically, a vague new life is not enough. You need specific interruptions to specific patterns. If the pattern is distraction, the interruption is protected focus. If the pattern is emotional dependency, the interruption is delayed response and stronger boundaries. If the pattern is financial avoidance, the interruption is weekly review. If the pattern is self-abandonment, the interruption is one kept promise per day. If the pattern is overthinking, the interruption is a deadline for action. If the pattern is chaos, the interruption is routine. If the pattern is shame, the interruption is honest repair. This is not glamorous, but it works because it meets life where life actually happens. In repeated situations, you do not rise to your dreams, you fall to your defaults. So build better defaults. That may be the simplest serious sentence in this entire message. You do not rise to your dreams, you fall to your defaults. Build better defaults. And do not underestimate how much your life can change when your defaults change. Imagine waking up and not immediately surrendering your attention. Imagine feeling anxiety and not buying relief. Imagine being criticized and not collapsing. Imagine wanting to return to an old pattern and pausing long enough to choose. Imagine having money and not automatically spending it to feel alive. Imagine being lonely and not confusing any attention with love. Imagine failing and not turning it into identity. Imagine succeeding and not letting ego make you careless. That is not a fantasy life. That is a trained life. Training is not only for athletes. Every person is trained. The only question is by what? By fear or by direction? By chaos or by standards? By wounds or by values? By algorithms or by intention? By old voices or by chosen principles? You are already being trained, so choose the trainer. That is the real invitation here. Not to believe that everything will magically happen because you think correctly, but to stop living as if your mind can become strong while everything around it keeps teaching weakness. Choose your training. Choose what enters. Choose what repeats. Choose what you practice under pressure. Choose what you no longer excuse. Choose what you protect. Choose what you are willing to be bad at until you become better. Choose what future version of you will thank you for. Because one day, you will meet the consequences of these choices. Not in theory, in your body, in your finances, in your relationships, in your peace, in your confidence, in your options, in the way you look at yourself when nobody is around. And on that day, you will either feel the quiet pain of knowing you kept delaying yourself, or the quiet pride of knowing you kept returning. Not perfectly, but honestly. And maybe that is the real victory, not becoming someone who never struggles, but becoming someone who no longer uses struggle as permission to disappear. Someone who can be tired and still responsible, afraid and still moving, hurt and still honest, uncertain and still disciplined, alone and still loyal to the future. That is a different kind of person. Not louder, not always impressive, but harder to defeat, because their strength is not built on mood. It is built on alignment. What they say, what they do, what they tolerate, and what they repeat start moving in the same direction. And once that happens, life may still be difficult, but at least the person is no longer fighting themselves at every step. That alone changes everything. So if this message finds you in a moment where you know you need to change, do not turn it into another emotional high. Do not collect it as another idea. Do not save it as another piece of content you agree with. Use it as a mirror. Ask yourself, where am I still feeding the identity I claim I want to leave? Where am I waiting for confidence when I should be building evidence? Where am I calling fear wisdom? Where am I calling avoidance patience? Where am I calling chaos personality? Where am I calling comfort peace? And most importantly, what is the smallest proof I can create today that the old pattern no longer has full control? Not the biggest proof, not the perfect proof, the smallest real one. Because one real proof is better than 1,000 imaginary transformations. One kept promise is better than one more dramatic declaration. One honest action is better than one more plan built to protect you from exposure. Start there, with proof. Then repeat. Then protect the repetition. Then let the repetition reshape your identity. And one day, the change that once felt forced will feel natural. Not because life became easy, but because you became less available for the version of yourself that made everything harder. That is when mindset becomes real. When it stops being something you say and becomes something your life can prove. So the final question is not whether your thoughts matter. They do. The final question is whether you are willing to build a life that trains better thoughts into existence. Because if your life keeps rewarding the old mind will return. But if your days begin to reward courage, clarity, discipline, honesty, and direction, then a new mind will not just appear. It will be earned. And what is earned becomes much harder to take away.